Hello, everyone, and welcome. Happy to bring us all together tonight. Welcome to the Marin Poetry Center Reading Series, which is produced in partnership with Mill Valley Library. My name is Amanda Moore, and I'm the events coordinator for the Marin Poetry Center. We are thrilled to be here tonight after so much beautiful rain with our regular third Thursday reading series, which we had hoped to bring back in person this fall. For the time being, however, we will continue hosting these readings online for the love and the safety of our many communities. Sign up for our newsletter on our brand new website, which you will find at marinpoetrycenter.org, and sign up for the Mill Valley Library newsletter to be the first to hear of future readings and our eventual safe return to the in-person readings in the Mill Valley Library and around the Bay Area. Our next Marin Poetry Center event is the launch of our annual Members Anthology, which will occur on Thursday, November 4th at 7 p.m. online. Details and registration link are available on our website, which we'll put in the chat throughout the evening so it's easier to find us. Our readings and offerings are free to the public, but I'd like to urge you to consider becoming a member of the Marin Poetry Center if you aren't already. You can find information on how to join on our website, again, which we'll post in the chat. Members support our community endeavors and fund events such as this. We are an all-volunteer organization, and the pandemic has stretched our few resources. At the moment, we are in special need of volunteer board members, particularly those who can help with social media, maintaining our website, and running our book club, Building Bridges, which last year featured monthly online discussions of books by such luminary poets as Jericho Brown, Victoria Chang, John Murillo, Natalie Diaz, and many others. We need your help to produce and support programming that fosters connection, sparks inclusive dialogue, and celebrates a wide range of poetic voices. Please be in touch if you'd like to learn more about joining our board. I usually begin these readings, as I will tonight, with an acknowledgement that the Marin Poetry Center operates on the unceded ancestral lands of the Coast Miwok. The land now known as Marin was and continues to be of great importance to the Coast Miwok, who have been and are its greatest stewards. We recognize that the Marin Poetry Center community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of the land of the Coast Miwok, and offer this land acknowledgement as a way to raise our community consciousness of Native sovereignty and cultural rights. This acknowledgement itself is a small gesture that is meaningful when coupled with informed action, which the Marin Poetry Center endeavors to undertake. Because of Zoom, I imagine we are not all standing in Marin right now. I, for example, am in San Francisco, on the traditional lands of the Ohlone and Hermitage. I encourage you all to learn and support the Native communities on whose lands you are living, learning, and appreciating poetry. I am taking a big, deep breath now in anticipation of tonight's reading with these big-hearted, talented poets whose work reaches into sadness, joy, grief, celebration, the totality of human experience to bring forth truth, beauty, and deeply memorable poetry. I will introduce Ben first and will pop back after his reading to introduce Danusha. The chat is open for your appreciation of their work during the reading, and you can post questions in the Q&A section that I'll present to them toward the end of the hour when we'll engage in a little dialogue, having been sated with their excellent poems. We'll be posting links to our bookshop in the chat so you have easy access to their books, all of which you need to buy and own and read again and again, so you can further savor their words even after tonight. Benjamin Gucciardi begins his excellent new book, which I have here, with the definition of its title, West Portal, which he defines as a hushed residential neighborhood in southwestern San Francisco at the base of Twin Peaks, and also the western terminus of an underground passage, the point where a train emerges into a city's western quadrant, or the end of a tunnel dug beneath razor wire, and also an entryway into the afterworld, the westward movement of the soul after the body dies, following the path of the setting sun. The poems that follow usher us through these landscapes and passages, literal and figurative, with a gentle yet unflinching hand. Though we confront a sister's untimely death and its aftermath, along with the perils of everyday life in a human body, this book is suffused with tenderness, meditating as it does on the importance of connection and the possibility of forgiveness and salvation. In the stunning long poem at the book's center, Gucciardi claims naming pain is a kind of violence, a terrible art best done with gesture, allegory. The gestures in West Portal are all ultimately toward beauty. In addition to West Portal, which won the Agha Shahid Ali Prize in Poetry from the University of Utah Press, Benjamin Gucciardi is the author of the chapbooks Timeless Tips for Simple Sabotage and I Ask My Sister's Ghost. His poems have appeared widely in outlets such as AGNI, Alaska Quarterly Review, and Best New Poets. In addition to writing, he works with newcomer youth in Oakland, California through Soccer Without Borders, an organization he founded in 2006. Please welcome Benjamin Gucciardi.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for that beautiful introduction. And I just want to also shout out, Amanda has her book, Requeening, coming out this week, which won the National Poetry Series this year. So exciting. And I can't wait to get a chance to read that. And really, thank you so much for having us and for all the work you do to support the series. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining on this one day post full moon, and we got some rain here in the Bay Area. I think we're all feeling very relieved, or I'm speaking for myself, feeling very relieved and happy. I went out for a run in the rain last night, and that was wonderful. So I'm gonna read from West Portal some poems from the book. This came out at the end of July, and I thought the first place I wanted to start was with a poem that I haven't read yet from the book. At a reading, but it's a poem, very much a Mill Valley poem, in the sense that the title is The Hermitage at Laureldale. And for some folks who might have hiked up on Mount Tamalpais and are familiar with Laureldale, there's a little place there called Bart's Retreat, which is a really beautiful spot and a very important spot to me and my family. And it was just kind of imagining the person who lived there at this little hermitage up on Mount Tamalpais. So it's fictional, but maybe not. The Hermitage at Laureldale. Of a life playing Bach for Moss on a swollen cello, lying for days in a field of milkmaids, undressing in fog to translate Jeffers, Wohl, Entfernung, Stein, Wahrheit. Only 6 rotted railroad ties remain, and a few microfiche slides of Emil Barth's meticulous cursive filling the page. A buck plus what's foraged feeds you well enough, he wrote in his journal, March 8, 1916, but a boar, salted and cured, is divine. When the poets come to visit, he didn't tell them he was unhappy, nearly always sick. He toasted with plum mead, laughed at stories of their trysts. So what? Touch haunts you, he told himself when they'd gone, drinking from the spring, scrubbing his doubt with clear water. The bombs would fall anyway. This next poem I want to read is called Type 2, and this is the first poem that opens the book. And as Amanda mentioned in the introduction, that some of the book interacts with the loss of my sister, who passed away with complications from diabetes, among other things. So this is a poem called Type 2. 5 times a day, I prick my finger and ask my blood about its failure. Out of its cage, it wants to discuss its better cages, how, before it was mine, it lived inside a python near Varanasi. The thrill of rushing when muscle snaps a rabbit's spine. how it wants to paint a self-portrait as the Ganges River. In the foreground, a woman in a yellow sari cleanses her son's limp body. His skin, the color of the river, the color of her eyes. That's how holy I am, it says, as I turn the meter off, trash the strip, and choose a new tract to stick the insulin in. The python uncoils from its catch, slinks beneath a rusty harrow. The woman weaves marigolds in her son's wet hair, climbs beside him on the bamboo board. The current ferries them off the canvas stretched over blue tile. Marigolds spill into my hamper, crimson petals on the bathroom floor. This next poem I'm going to read is called Advice for Pallbearers. To make the sound of your footsteps disappear requires practice. A cornfield in late autumn when the ground is brittle enough to repeat what it hears. Best if the 6 of you can go together at dusk. Find a barn owl. A corn crow will do. See how close you can get before the bird startles. Observe the interaction of air and wing. Before you handle the casket, borrow your mother's finest crystal vase. Carry it through the crowded parking lot to the water park. Ride the slides. Let nothing shatter. The trick is for the coffin to appear to float. The weight of his failures superfluous. Let him be known as a saint for a few moments before he is forgotten. So this next poem I'm going to read is called Masa. I thought my sister's ashes would feel like masa. Clumpy, maybe, but milled free from her figure. But when I cup a handful to sow in the canyon where we gathered nasturtiums, I meet flame's laziness. 2 triangles of bone intact among the powder. A vertebrae's corner? Her middle phalanx that steadied the blade she pulled across her wrist? Arrowheads we should have left in the cornfield. Cobalt glass the sea spit up, or the sails of the toy ship we captained in the tub, water sloshing over the porcelain rim as we summoned a squall through which only fools like us would sail. So this next poem I'm going to read is called I Ask My Sister's Ghost to Take Me With Her. And throughout the book, there's a series of poems with that same refrain. And I think something that I really love about poetry and maybe why I write poems is the chance to try to communicate with things that are outside of this time and place and outside of what we consider to be ordinary. And it feels like poetry is one of the few kind of spaces where that's socially acceptable, and where people are kind of okay with that being the case, and as a very old practice. And so this is a poem in conversation with my sister. I ask my sister's ghost to take me with her. Not because the reefs are bleaching, because I want to see how thin the veil is. To row behind her in the boat she came in, row all day into night, and where the river turns to delta, blade my oar to beach the dinghy on a bank of silt and cattail. Because I want to hide with her in midnight's swaying, turn my ears from the throng of bullfrogs to the song she hums, listen to her stories of its blind composer, how he charmed wives at the royal parties in Dublin, his fingers sweeping each glissando, his eyes clouded over like a cod on ice. There is a symbol she taught me for a word that has no word, but I can never remember how to draw it, what tone to put in my throat to speak. The inked shape of that mutable mark hangs just beyond the last branch of my mind as she turns to leave. There is nothing I can say to convince her to take me, so I pluck the tongue from my mouth and lay it flat on a stone. When she bends to inspect the petal, it becomes a red door. It creaks as she opens it, walks into the unspoken without turning back. This next poem I'm going to read is called Prayer for the Instant City. And something funny, I wonder, Danusha and Amanda, if you have this experience too, but there's like one error in the book, in the printing, and the error was that somehow the word stalking got converted to talking in this poem. So the line is stalking God's love, but it printed as talking God's love. And so it's just an interesting thing that, of course, like I, was obsessing about when I first saw it, but it's totally not a big deal. But it's just an interesting thing when the book gets printed to find something like that. But this is a poem called Prayer for the Instant City. In the makeshift mosque, 24 men kneel, heads pressed to the straw carpet. In white linen, khaki slacks, they bend like egrets in the shallows, stalking God's love, that sweet, rasping toad. Look at the marks on their foreheads, Hassan tells me, as we begin our shift. You can see who prays the most. We are delivering tents for the hundreds that arrive from Homs, Aleppo, the villages between. A camp becomes a city the way a wound becomes a scar. Beside their fathers, the smallest boys pray. I have never seen my father bow, but once in the woods, after my sister's death, he called the ground up to him. Eyes closed, leaning into filtered light, the leaves and the soil came. The ants crawled across his prayer. The Arabic script tilts. Each hymn a calligraphy of ships the imam steers, his voice like water slapping the hull. A call, plated voices answer. By you, we enter the evening. By you, we enter the morning. The ship's wake widens into silence. When we were children, my sister buried my father to the neck in sand. He smiled as her yellow pail emptied on his chest. I placed a chipped white limpet over each of his eyes. So I want to read a poem, maybe actually two poems that are engaging with some of the work that I do with youth. And this first poem is called The Rungs, and it's a poem about holding restorative circles with young people. And I'll read these two poems, and then I'll close with one more. So, The Rungs. Only the person with the green dice should be talking, I remind the boys, holding up the oversized foam cubes. And the others should be listening, Kay says. And how should we listen? Con el corazón, M replies, thumping his chest with his closed fist. That's right, I say, with the heart. Who wants to start? The dice are passed around the circle and the boys gloss over the check-in question. When they reach B, who walked here unaccompanied from Honduras 3 months ago, he holds them like boulders. We straighten when his lip begins to quiver. It's not my place to tell you what he shared that day, but I can tell you how M put his hand on B's back and said, Mahe, desahogarte, which translates roughly to undrown yourself, though no English phrase so willingly accepts that everyone has drowned, and that we can reverse that gasping, expel the fluids from our lungs. I sit quietly as the boys make with their bodies the rungs of a ladder, and B climbs up from the current, sits in the sun for a few good minutes before he jumps back in. The dice finished the round, and we are well over time. I resist the urge to speak about rafts, what it means to float. Good, I tell them. Let's go back to class. After handshakes and side hugs, I'm left alone in the small room with a box of unopened tissues, 2 Starburst wrappers on the ground. And actually, I'm just keeping my eye on the clock, so I'm gonna finish with this. Okay, I'm okay with time then. So okay, I'm gonna read this other one then. This is another poem about working with young people. So this is a poem called The Arachnologist. When he told me his teeth felt too heavy to study history, I excused him. I knew he was headed for the aqueduct or the boarded up houses choked by trumpet vine where he found them. Martel collected spiders with the discipline of a surgeon. He kept them in empty soda bottles under his bed. On his way into 6th period, he touched my fist with his fist, announced the genus of his catch, Laterodectus, and his total. That's 9 this week. Through this tally of arachnids captured in sugary plastic, we learned to trust each other, the way men on tankers far out at sea confide reluctantly in gray, rippling water. When his best friend broke the news, they found Martel last night, her voice quavering, stray bullet off International. I went to his house to adopt a spider. I imagined the red hourglass on the female's abdomen emptying itself slowly, her segmented body imprisoned in the glow of the green tinted bottle. But no one was home. Now, when I hear the old women gathering cans at dawn, half swallowed by blue waste bins, I think of Martel finding containers to bring to the canyon. Martel inspecting stones, placing his fingers delicately around the thorax. The 8 legs angry at the morning as he lifts the orb weaver to the sun, offering what he loved to the old hungry light. And I'm going to finish with a short poem called The Nest. And I think this was the first poem that I wrote that I felt like was maybe an okay poem. It's in dedication to a Salvadoran poet named Alfredo Espino, who wrote a poem called El Nido, in which he describes being the presence of a bird who's singing inside of a tree, but he can't see the bird because it's in the inside of a tree. And so this is a poem with a similar premise. The Nest. This morning, I watched a goldfinch disappear into a tree through a hole no bigger than my open mouth. From the hollow, the finch began her crooning. That's what poetry is, I thought. Not the tree, but the hidden song. Not the yellow bird, but the instinct to climb inside the darkness to sing. So thank you all so much. And I'm so excited to get to hear Danusha read. Danusha is one of my favorite poets and people, and I'm really honored to be reading with you. So thank you so much for having me, Amanda, and everybody. Really, really appreciate you all.
Oh, Ben, thank you so much. That was lovely. wow. You cannot hear the amazing applause that you would if we were in the Valley Library, but you can read in the chat the ways that just this brief experience with your book has been so touching and grounding for people. Thank you. Well, it is my great pleasure to next introduce Danusha Laméris. Now, I don't have metrics or data around this. I am just a poet after all, but I'd be willing to bet that Laméris's poem, Small Kindnesses, which you can read in her award-winning recent collection, Bonfire Opera, is among the most shared poems of the pandemic. Just anecdotally, I can list a dozen people, including my non-poetry reading aunt, who have sent it to me personally, and I've seen it posted and reposted and posted again on social media, websites, and even in the window of a shop on Haight Street. Small Kindnesses resonates with so many people, I think, because it dwells in the world we want to live in, seeing us, humanity, at our best, or at least with our best in reach, and lifting us up toward light. Well, I'm here to tell you that this is the gift of Laméris's body of work, not simply a single viral poem. Even when her poems touch tragedy and sadness, the death of loved ones, the collapse of relationships or our world, they nudge the reader toward peace, toward a greater understanding. Hers are poems that can crackle with wit or humor and then drop us into a profound human truth that can pluck a painful memory from the past and plant it deep in a wise and nourishing garden. She brings us poems of our lives and our world, whether about sexting, the painful beauty of a surfer girl working the counter at the Aloha Island Grill, or annoying mosquitoes. And she holds these lives up to us as if to the light, revealing through her poems the way we all glow. Danusha Laméris's first book, The Moons of August, was chosen by Naomi Shihab Nye as the winner of the Autumn House Press Poetry Prize and was a finalist for the Milt Kessler Book Award. Some of her work has been published in the Best American Poetry, New York Times, Orion, the American Poetry Review, the Gettysburg Review, Ploughshares, and Prairie Schooner. Her second book, Bonfire Opera, was a finalist for the 2021 Patterson Poetry Award and the winner of the Northern California Book Award in Poetry, where she gave a phenomenal acceptance speech that I hope is somewhere on the internet for you to enjoy. The 2018 to 2020 Poet Laureate of Santa Cruz County, California, she currently co-leads Poetry of Resilience webinars with James Cruz and is on the faculty of Pacific University's low residency MFA program. Please join me in a very excited welcome for Danusha Laméris.
Thank you so much, Amanda and Julian and the Mill Valley Public Library and Marin Poetry Center for putting on this reading. And I'm still just sort of caught in the wave of Ben's reading. So I'm going to try to, get in my body and read my own poems. But I really just got swept out to sea by those beautiful, heartbreaking poems, as I'm sure many of you are in the same state that I am in. So I just want to acknowledge that before I attempt to start reading. And also it was just kind of funny hearing your beautiful intro just then when I was like, I remember when my bio, and I'm just saying this for all the poets out there, I remember when my bio was like, Danusha Laméris likes poetry. We all had that bio at some point, like, and horses or something, you try to add in a hobby. So I always tell my students, don't worry about that. Just worry about the writing or focus on the writing, Anyway, that is what they call an aside. But I like to begin with sort of an invocation. And lately it's been this little 8-line poem that I wrote as a prompt to make a pocket poem for the New York Public Library, something people could take home in their pockets. But I decided to write about pockets and about the heart. So I'll begin with this. It's called The Heart Is Not. The heart is not a pocket, a thing that can be turned inside out by anybody's hand, not a place for pebbles or loose change, not to carry old receipts. It does not tear at the seam. It does not have a seam. It cannot be torn. I think I write poems to remind myself of what I need to hear. So that's what that functions as. I think I'm going to read things. It's funny, you know, when you're kind of going to your next book, when you're starting to read things that are not in a book yet. And I feel that starting to happen. This is a short poem called Glass that I wrote partly about my house, my family home burning down in the Berkeley Oakland Hills fire many years ago. So not these recent fires, but I know many people here can relate to fire. Glass. It's the small things that haunt. Oranges, because my mother used to peel them for me, slip the rough sections in my mouth. Luckies, because of the wayward boy who lit my first, leaning against the railing of the pier. O solo mio, wafts up from the downstairs apartment. Now it means all those summers. Can't they just turn it off? I walk through Queen Anne's Lace in late September, down to the cove where I used to meet a man who was dying. That flower now added to my own vocabulary of loss. What doesn't in time enter grief's lexicon? When I think of our house after the fire, all I see are pools of pink glass, once our ice cream bowls, melted on the ruins. I was thinking as I read that, or just before, that the Mill Valley Library is where I went when I was learning to read. I lived near Boyle Park, sort of up the hill from there, near enough to downtown. And I remember we'd go to the library and then also to this little Italian restaurant that I think might still be there. And the waiter would make me little animals out of the napkins. I don't know. That's all coming back right now. And it's such a beautiful space, that library. I've been so grateful for it at different stages of my life, clearly. I think I'll read Omens, a poem that has a typo in it in my book. It says though instead of through, which is sort of nonsensical in the poem, but what can you do? Life is so imperfect. And that's the least of our problems, isn't it? Typos. But when you're a poet, it feels like such a big thing. Omens. Out here, we read everything as a sign. The coyote in its scruffed coat bending to eat a broken persimmon on the ground. The mess of crows that fills the apple tree, makes a racket, lifts off. In between, quiet. The winter fog is a blank. I wish I could make sense of the child's empty bed. The bullet hole through my brother's heart. The mailman drops a package on the front stoop, and the neighbor's dog won't stop barking. I tread down the stairs lightly. Because we can't know what comes next, we say, the plum tree is blooming early. There are buck antlers lying in the grass. A mountain lion left its footprints by the bridge. I marked something else to read for you guys. Thinking of something Ben read. A poem called The Bedouin Dress. Let me take a moment. I didn't mark the page. There it is, page 22. I marked it in my mind, but not actually in the book. I don't think I ever read this poem. It's funny how when you have your book and you mark certain pages, you read certain things, and I don't think I ever read this. But it's about a dress my mother had all the time that I was growing up that I would love to try on. The Bedouin Dress. It hung in my mother's closet, black and heavy as a cloak, embroidered at the breast with deep red stitches, reminder of our brief life in Beirut, where my father unfolded a fistful of bills for it in the desert heat. Empty on the hanger, it seemed filled with the presence of the woman for whom it had been woven. Sometimes I slipped into it, my arms vanishing into the length of the sleeves, extra yardage pooled at my feet. I liked to brush my cheek against the roughness of the cloth, run my thumb over the maze of raised threads, inhale the world hidden within. And though it's been decades since our house burned to a pile of ash, I go back there in my mind, walk through the rooms, remembering, touch the dress again, feel it in my palm. The way we all visit our losses in the ruined house of the past, rooms of oak and grass, sky and sand. The way the woman who once wore the dress must sit over an evening fire, heating the water for tea, remembering a child's hair, black as a birdwing, or her husband singing under the moon, his voice thinned by cigarettes. Who knows if she ever thinks of the dress, a dress she danced in, a dress she wore over the curve of her growing womb, a dress she smoothed with the palm of her hand before setting out the evening meal. She slid it on in the morning, then pulled it off over her long unbraided hair at night. A dress she wore when she lived in a village to which she can never return. A dress she carried under her arm as she fled, garment of dust, of smoke, of memory, garment of exile still hanging in the burned room. I honestly feel like that's the first time I've read that aloud. It's so funny how I don't know what it is that we do to ourselves. I'll read maybe a couple more poems because I want to be open to Q&A if people want to Q&A. I guess there's a place to put those kinds of things for Amanda, who'll be sorting through them. So we welcome that. Okay. Oh, all the heartbreak. This is where we get to put it. I'd like to read a little poem for my son. Working in the garden, I think of my son, who is nothing now, but a few fistfuls of ash. Not even that, since ash dissolves and is taken into the bodies of plants or swept into the air on the wind. He's so very fine. He slips undetected through a whale's baleen or a beetle's gullet. He can even rise through a stalk of grass with the upward pull of phloem in these first green days of spring. He has no use now for the soft black hair through which I would run a slender comb, nor for his oddly shaped thumbs, nor anything in this world. Though the things of the world may have use of him, his molecules filtering through them Carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, a whisper of hydrogen, the modest building blocks of life, quietly and without announcement. I'll just read you guys one more little, just a little poem that's new. That's what I feel like reading. One of those 14-line kinds of poems called What Begins. What begins in beauty ends in beauty. What begins in sorrow ends in sorrow. The seed once planted, soon in full bloom. If grief, then grief. If anger, anger. They say the first week of any love affair reveals its end. Give me the child at 7, and so forth. And didn't the world begin with a bang? Hard to argue for another truth. But I have seen a heart worn thin take to small repairs. Have watched a blue jay born wild eat out of a woman's hand. And didn't we begin as tadpoles curled and gilled? I want to think the starting place is only one location on a curve that we can follow to another end and then begin again. Thank you. Thanks everyone for participating here with us, far apart as we may be. We will begin again at some point.
I'm ready for your small repairs, Danusha.
Some of those.
And I'm sorry we can't retire down the hill to the Italian restaurant after this, but it will happen.
I want the little animal napkin folder. Could that happen?
We'll work on that. Yes. I mean, when we can be back in person, anything can happen.
Anything can happen.
Thank you for that incredible reading. Again, I hope you find your accolades in the chat and your love there, because we can't applaud you. Please remember there's a question and answer, a Q&A box where you can type your questions and I'll ask them on your behalf. We already have one from Lori Ann. I hope I'm saying that right. Bosselar. This is a question for both of you. You have in common amazing images, similes, metaphors. Do you choose between 3 or 4 similes or metaphors, trying on a few, or do they come to you rather quickly?
Do you want to go first, Ben?
If you feel ready, Danusha.
I don't know that I do. I'll think about it. Well, it's funny to me because I feel like I don't use that many metaphors compared to some poets. I don't think of it as my strong point as a poet. Probably I tend to go with one of the earlier ones. Like if one comes, it's a gift, and I probably tend to use it. I don't know. How about you?
Yeah, I guess the part of the question that is resonating with me is, do they come rather quickly? And I think it's probably the opposite for me, in the sense that I spend a lot of time just being with a poem and trying to let the image trying to understand why the image is there and what it's connected to, and just kind of sitting with that. And I think that feels really, I don't know, it feels like such a nice process. Like it feels like such a nice meditation. And I guess maybe that they come initially quickly, but it usually takes me a long time to kind of figure out why it's significant and to try to convey that so that it's significant not only to me, but for someone else. And I don't know if that always works, but that's what I'm trying to do, I guess.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to skip around a little in the questions because there's a follow-up that is one I share too, since both of you ended up talking a little bit about your writing process. I'd be interested in hearing a little bit about your process. And Lori Ann added, do you keep reading your poems out loud over and over to acquire the music in your lines? Or, you know, what is that writing process like for both of you?
Well, first I want to say hi to Lauren. She's a fine poet herself, and poet laureate still, I think, of Santa Barbara. And I'm just so excited to meet her in real life at some point soon. So just want to say hello and send love. And what is our process? Okay, let me sit with that question. I think I can begin by saying I love to putter and work in the garden and do those kinds of things. And then usually there's a line that will come. And I don't like to stare at a blank page. So I don't tend to do that, like sit down and look at a page, try to write. I putter and then something arrives and I will note it down and I read. I think of myself as a reader before I think of myself as a writer. It's less pressure. I think of myself as a person who plants things first, then a person who reads. And so when you read a lot of poetry, it's hard not to want to write some. There's so much amazing poetry out there, and I feel like especially right now. So I try to give myself that gift. And then once I have those starting lines, I might incubate them for a week or 10 years, you know, and tinker. I putter and tinker. I think I like to make things really sound light so that, so I don't avoid the writing. I just think I don't have to do much. What if I change one line? That's enough. Go on to the next poem. Be with it for a bit. Maybe I change a couple things or add a stanza. Great. So it kind of looks like that for me. How about you, Ben?
Yeah, there's a quote that I keep coming back to lately, which is I think it's Amy Lowell said that poetry is a Herculean effort on the part of the conscious mind to match the subconscious mind. And I like that a lot because I think a lot of what's interesting to me about poetry is being able to go into the subconscious. And I don't know, sometimes when, like how you describe, like something just comes, the image just comes, or something just happens, being able to access that part of yourself that's like less cognitive, this is just sort of there. But then it's not just staying in that place. There's also space for math and meter and sound, and the conscious kind of rational mind also has a place. And so I guess the subconscious being like where you generate stuff from, and then the conscious being more of like a revision process. And I love that you can do both, because that means, you know, like at any given time I might have 10 poems I'm working on, and some of them are very early stages, and I'm not generating anything right then. Like it's just a period where nothing's coming, but I can still work with a more kind of conscious, rational mind. And then other times it feels like, I don't know, like I got to be out in Bolinas for a little while recently, and it was like, oh, that felt much more generative that time, where there was just like a lot of, where I was just closer to the subconscious maybe. So I guess I love that poetry has space for both of those things, and that you can engage all those different parts of it, and then that's what ends up coming through. You can feel both of those things, and I think poems where you can feel both of those things feel really powerful to me.
Wonderful, thank you. Meryl Natchez, and this maybe stems from what Danusha was saying about reading being a part of her practice. Meryl would like to know what you are reading now, both of you. What's feeding your practice? What poets are you engaging with, or what other texts are you finding?
Gosh, I mean, to start with, I try to read certain journals every month or quarter whenever they come out. So that's kind of my starting place, is to keep those by the bed. The by the bed pile is getting really dangerous. I feel like in an earthquake sense, it's getting bad. But there's always so many exciting new voices. I'm enjoying John Murillo's work a lot. You mentioned him, and I'm loving his phrasing. And oh gosh, it's like when I try to think of it, I've got who else in that pile right now? Hanif Abdulakib's book I just opened, same thing about phrasing. Some people have these sentences that just make me crazy. Like they're so beautifully constructed. I mean, the content as well, but you know, anyway, that's two that come to mind.
Yeah, I think one book I've been reading is Arthur Z's The Glass Constellations lately, which is like a collected poems. And I remember, well, one it's a very based in like Western landscape, New Mexico, but also a lot in California. And I remember when I was reading it, I was thinking, I can't believe I've never heard of this poet. And that's something else I really love about poetry. I mean, I'm not like I didn't do like a formal course of study in poetry, but so it's not that surprising that I wouldn't have heard of it. But that's something I really do love, is like you can come across a poet and have not heard of them, and it's just be totally blown away by, you know, I think that book is 50 years of collected poems, dating back to the, you know, to the early 60s, I think, and just an amazing body of work. And then I want to also, Peter Klein is here. I've been reading his books. Especially he has a new one called Mirror Forms, which I want to just recommend to everybody. It's these really innovative 8-line poems, this form that he created. So beautiful book. And there's just so many amazing poets in the Bay Area too. I mean, I think that's it. I really try to read other poets who are writing right now here, and just feel connected to like a group of peers. I think that's a really beautiful thing, and feels really special about this place.
So
thank you.
So much amazing writing in the Bay Area alone. It's really wild. We're lucky.
Well, we're mostly lucky to have gotten to spend this hour with the two of you, to hear your poems and to hear your answers to these questions. Thank you so much for your time. Thank everyone. I want to thank everyone for being here, for tuning in with us tonight. If you want to revisit this amazing reading, it will be posted on YouTube to the Mill Valley Library channel, so you can go back and revisit your favorite moments and your favorite poems. And I just want to, again, thank you, and my heart thanks you for everything we've all gotten to experience tonight.
Thank you so much, Amanda.
Thanks for having us. Miss you guys at this distance, but
in person someday soon.
Soon enough. And thank you so much for hosting us.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
With your books, both of you.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. Good night.
Good night.